And so what do we do when we're in a state of incredible suffering and distress and we have no control about it? The only place to go is inward.
Okay.
And that's where the fun stuff starts. If I had to say one thing, one take-home point, pick one strategy that will work for people. I would not tell you boundaries. I wouldn't even say sleep, even though sleep is beyond pivotal. I would say focus on your body. Focus on the meditation piece.
From Ontario's personal injury law firm, McLeish Orlando, this is Behind the Suit, a plaintiff's journey.
Hello and welcome back to the McLeish Orlando podcast, Behind the Suit. This is episode 5, and I'm Dale Orlando, the host today. I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Miss Noha George.
Hello there, Dale.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Noha's going to be speaking with us today about compassionate fatigue and burnout, the causes, and hopefully some potential solutions.
Yes, I'm looking forward to doing that.
But before we get into the topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, I obviously have worked with you on and off over the years, but for our audience, how did you start into this field? You know, give us a little bit of your educational background and your experience in the field.
So I did a philosophy undergrad at U of T. Believe it or not, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Oh.
But I had a bit of an existential crisis, which lends itself well to this topic, at the age of 21. Had to do with relationship issues. And I ended up living for 6 months at a convent in the foothills of the Rockies in Alberta.
Wow.
And having a complete change of identity, getting in touch with who I was and who I wanted to be. And I did a complete turnaround and went into social work.
So this is at the age of 21.
This is at the age of 21.
So had you done a philosophy degree at this point, or were you partway through?
I had finished my philosophy degree at that point.
Okay.
So I came back to Toronto. It was probably 21, 22. I can't remember now at the age of 55, but it was somewhere around there. Came back to Toronto, finished my social work degree, went to work. All my friends were going to Europe to, travel once they graduated, but I didn't have that luxury. So I went straight into the first job that I found, which was sort of accidental because I actually wanted to work with the homeless population. I had done a lot of my practicum at Covenant House. I found myself by accident working at a rehab clinic that worked primarily with people who had experienced a motor vehicle accident.
Okay. How did you get into that spot? Was it just luck?
Well, interestingly enough, it was just the job that was available.
Right.
So I took it. I did not want to get into rehab at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So just you needed a job and it was there.
I needed a job.
So...
I needed money. I couldn't go to Europe like my friends.
Right.
I had to pay the rent, put food on the table. So I landed this job. And it was a clinic where everybody sort of got the same cookie cutter approach. I started to notice that there were some unethical practices, and there was one particular day, I used to live downtown Toronto, where I was taking a taxi because the subway had been shut down, and one of my clients picked me up, and apparently he wasn't working. So I was very disillusioned because I was young, and I used to see these clients/patients in that community setting, and I just sort of believed all their stories at face value.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that
So
your taxi driver was actually a client who was supposed to be not working, was working under the table.
That's exactly it.
I see.
So very shortly thereafter, I quit my job, and actually the physio that was there also quit, and the clinic was shut down shortly thereafter, but we won't get into those details. They closed down.
What clinic was it? Can you say?
Not really. I don't want to.
Oh, you can say. It's okay. I mean, it's a long time
I think I'd rather
ago.
not. I'll tell you offset.
Okay. Well, how long were you there?
So I worked there for almost a year and a half.
Okay.
Again, my memory's not. And then what happened is I went into a bit of a just around that time, I had been going through a difficult time trying to sort out where my life was going, and my father had passed away, and I was just in a little bit of a funk. And I started looking for something, and I wanted something that was real. I didn't want to be somewhere where I wasn't feeling like I was genuinely making a difference. And I landed a job at Bridgepoint Hospital, which was one of the most incredible experiences for me. I met people there that really, obviously patients that were there that really needed care, support. I saw integrity all around me. That was my first exposure to lawyers like yourself.
Right.
Sometimes lawyers, I hope I can say this, sometimes lawyers get a bad rap and people think that
they deserve it.
Well, not
sometimes they do.
Yeah. Well, the good ones don't, right?
Right.
The good ones don't.
But we all get tarred with the same brush, unfortunately.
Exactly. Well, just like the clinic, right?
Right.
You had a couple of people who left me feeling disillusioned and doubting, how the system works. And so I met wonderful lawyers who really, like yourself, who cared about the patients,
right,
who wanted to do, education, et cetera, to promote the knowledge in the community about brain injury. So I was involved in a lot of initiatives in that regard. And then I had my second child, and I was getting tired. And speaking of burnout, I was burning out from the commute downtown, because at that point I was living in Markham. And so I started doing private practice in the community.
Right. So when you were in the hospital setting, was it like 8 hours a day of patient interaction, dealing with, obviously people at Bridgepoint are seriously injured and dealing with could be a life-changing event for them.
Yeah.
And that must have put some stress on you as well.
Yes, I went through a lot of different phases. When I first started working, I had a short stint in the amputee unit. And so I would literally feel pain in my leg in the same spot where I would walk into a room and see someone with a recent amputation. I was literally having these sympathetic pains, and it wasn't obviously that intense, but I would just cringe,
Yeah.
So I kind of went overboard in my first years as a social worker. And back in those days, I was telling Jasmine that I wanted to be a nun. And so it was like my vocation. So I was really crazy. I didn't have good boundaries. I was young. I was 25, and I would stay at the hospital until sometimes 8 or 9 o'clock.
Right.
I'd go and pick up Chinese food for clients, and I'd sit and
care
talk.
too much.
I care too much.
Right.
And I grew up very quickly, though, and I realized that I couldn't do that. And then I just kind of started to set more healthy boundaries. And here I am, 30 years later. I've been working in the MVA sector now for around 15 years, I think.
So what
It's been quite a
era?
journey.
So your private practice, it sounds like it would have started in the early 2000s.
Well, actually, no. I've been doing private practice since I was at Bridgepoint. I had an office on Harvard, so I just didn't get into all those details. It was on the side.
Yeah, no, I thought you said you started about 20 years ago at Bridgepoint. But the only reason I'm asking is because it'll remind me of what no-fault regime we were in.
Oh, I'll tell you what that is. So let me tell you. So I've been through about 5 different bills.
Yeah.
If I'm not wrong, was it Bill 164 or Bill 64?
So Bill 164 was in place from January 1, 1994 until I think September 1st, 1996. And that's the one. That was the good one.
164, right?
Well, that was the good one for accident benefits, but terrible for tort, because you could only sue for pain and suffering and loss of enjoyment of life, nothing else. But on the no-fault side, I mean, the benefits were through the roof, and there was no catastrophic. Like, everybody was entitled to millions of dollars in benefits potentially.
I remember those days, and I think this is why certain clinics were thriving. Oh boy, let me tell you, it was a free-for-all. It was scary.
Oh, there was a clinic popping up on every corner at that point.
Yeah.
And I think the industry quickly realized this no-fault isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And then in November of 96 brought in Bill 59, which restored tort rights.
I remember that. Yeah. So that was so I think I started in I started in 1995.
Okay. Right in the middle of Bill 164.
That was it.
Yeah,
164.
yeah.
Yeah, there's been a lot of bills. I used to pay a lot of attention to all the changes. And speaking of burnout, I just stopped caring. Like, I leave it up to lawyers like you, Dale, to be honest with you. That's one of the ways I manage my burnout. I don't even want to know anymore. When people say to me, hey, there's a debriefing or there's a conference or there's a seminar, honestly, I don't even go. Yeah. You won't see me there. As long as I'm with a competent lawyer who knows what they're doing, I don't need to know.
Right.
It's like being on an airplane.
Yeah, you don't need to.
Pilot.
Yeah, you don't have to know how to fly it.
You can sleep through the turbulence.
You got it. Yeah, I mean, it's really on the lawyer to make sure that the client is getting what they're entitled to within the limits that are available. And unfortunately, every new bill shrinks the amount of benefits that are available. I mean, the last bill, catastrophic went from 2 million to 1 million, and the test got 3 times as hard. So, and they're trying to sell it as well. You can still buy optional coverage. So the government presents it as a matter of choice. Like, we don't want to burden you with high premiums. We'll give you this choice so you can choose to buy this additional coverage, but it's not mandatory. Yeah. And unfortunately, like, literally nobody buys it. Yeah. And I've done hundreds of interviews with, people that are looking to retain a lawyer, and they're not even aware.
People don't know about it.
They're not aware.
I did a little educational session with the Ontario Rehab Alliance, I believe, Laurie Davis, several years ago. Yep. And we educated insurance, I think it was insurance brokers, about the importance of educating their clients. But I'm not sure, I can't assume, if they necessarily want people to buy up. I don't know. I can't assume. I know a lot of incredible adjusters that are wonderful people, so I'm not going to make any assumptions about anything. But one comment that I would like to make about what you just said, Dale, is it's incredible how these small changes in legislation, I mean, I'm using the word small somehow a little too... it's not really small. It's a huge, they appear to be small. This is what I'm trying to say, have detrimental effects and trickle-down effects everywhere. Like, the MVA industry is like I think of it sometimes like a ping pong. Is it ping pong or no, a pool table. Right. A ball goes somewhere and it hits another ball, and that ball hits another ball, and that ball hits another ball. It's the impact of some of these changes is tremendous, and it impacts every single person in the industry. So for me, in terms of burnout, when I'm working with a client who's stressed out or who's not getting coverage for things that they should be getting coverage for, or, ideally would benefit from, it's exhausting. Oh, I'm sure. Because that's what we're hearing day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, and there's only so much you can do as the healthcare provider, and, and the lawyer to a certain extent. So, there's lots of reasons for denials. In our firm, mostly it's because the client runs out of money. Right. So if you have somebody with a catastrophic injury, it's great. You've got $1 million for med, for rehab, and attendant care. But that goes pretty quickly. Yeah. And the test for catastrophic is such that oftentimes you don't really have a viable opportunity to move a client from the non-catastrophic category into the catastrophic category for 2 years. Right? Because the 55% whole person impairment test applies only after 2 years of recovery. Yeah. So you got a client with $65,000 for med, rehab, and attendant care, horrific injuries. We know they're going to be catastrophic, but we have to wait until 2 years. Yeah. And they've used their $65,000 in the first 3 months, and now what do? Yeah. And you know as well as I do, if you don't front end load that treatment, you're really putting up a roadblock to recovery, Absolutely. Whether it's physical recovery or psychological recovery. Absolutely. Somebody 2 years after the fact that's been without treatment for a year and 9 months, they're pretty entrenched at that point psychologically, I would assume. And this is your expertise.
They identify as, first of all, they start to feel hopeless and helpless, and they start to identify with that wounded, broken identity where they've had everything stripped from them. Right. And the worst part is I've noticed there's a lot of secondary stress and trauma that comes from feeling like you're just not being supported by, by an industry. Like, you pay money for your insurance and you feel like you have to, I hear it all the time from clients. Like, I feel like I have to prove, that I really need this? Why can't people believe me? I wish
Right.
they would see how much I'm suffering.
Yeah, and that's
And the way the legislation is set up is that it doesn't matter, you know. The funding is not there.
well, it depends. I mean, like sometimes when the funding runs out, it runs out, and you know, they're practitioners. Some will work under a protected account. You know, sometimes we can get an advance on the lawsuit side. You know, sometimes clients will resort to a litigation loan at like 24%.
Yeah.
So that they can continue treatment.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, and I agree with you, there are some amazing adjusters out there.
Yeah.
There are also some terrible adjusters.
Of course, like any industry.
Right. And they view every single claimant as if the starting point is they're fraud.
Yep.
They're a fraud.
You're guilty until proven innocent.
Right. So like I said, I've represented insurance adjusters. We get referrals from really good adjusters when they have a friend or family member is injured, they send them to us. But I've also worked with adjusters who, you know, I'm banging my head against the wall in the same way you are, saying like, how can you treat this person this way? They're your client. You're insured. You're supposed to treat them with the utmost good faith.
Yeah.
And, you know, this isn't some kind of sore neck, sore back. I mean, you know, we've got somebody with horrific injuries and you're putting up roadblocks to their recovery when there shouldn't be.
I have a client right now who just went through hernia surgery and he couldn't even get payment for 4 days stay at the Shouldice Clinic.
That's crazy.
It broke my heart. And can I just tell you how many hours I spent talking to him, trying to facilitate the cost for that, and then a treatment plan and everything, and it was denied.
Well, I know you always go above and beyond for your clients.
Well, it's heartbreaking, you know. I mean, it's just totally heartbreaking. He lost his home. He had to move in, you know, with someone that he sort of knows who gave him a place to stay. He was stripped of everything. This was an executive who got hit while he was on a bicycle. He lost everything. His entire functioning changed. I mean, he has a brain injury. He can't walk properly. He can't exercise. I mean, I won't get into all the details, but I was shocked. It was basic.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's terrible.
It's a tough business to work in, to be honest with you.
Well, that brings us right to our topic of today, which is burnout and compassionate fatigue. So you're the expert in this field. To me, it's the same thing, but there's a difference, isn't there?
It's very, very slight, and I'll tell you what it is. It's the context. So burnout applies often to a vocational setting, a work setting. So someone at McDonald's can experience burnout because they're working long hours, they don't have a lot of resources available to them, they don't get proper breaks, whatever the case may be in that particular situation. A person working at McDonald's wouldn't necessarily suffer from compassion fatigue unless if too many people are complaining about, you know, their French fries and having traumatic breakouts. But in general, compassion fatigue is used to refer to people who work more in the realm of caregiving. So we often hear it when it comes to nurses and doctors. We heard it a lot during the pandemic. However, and people like myself, mental health workers, frontline workers and staff, attendant care, etc. But I also see from working with lawyers, there's a lot of burnout as well as compassion fatigue, because as a lawyer, and for those adjusters, the ones you were describing earlier, who are empathetic and caring and sensitive, they want to remain true to their values, right? They're not the adjusters who are going to say no to someone who's having a hernia surgery because they have that basic human compassion. They're also at risk for burning out. So compassion fatigue, what is it? Compassion fatigue is exactly what it sounds like. It's being absolutely exhausted from giving. You just, from reaching out and being empathetic and extending yourself to people or witnessing the trauma that people are going through. And it happens over an extended period of time. Often the characteristics are prolonged exposure. It doesn't have to be direct exposure. Sometimes there's vicarious trauma by hearing about things that are happening. It happened a lot during the pandemic, you know, watching images on television, etc. But the primary difference is that compassion fatigue happens within a caregiving context, whereas burnout happens more within the context of
vocational
work.
Right, right, right. So focusing on compassionate fatigue, because that's the area we work in,
Yeah.
you know, and I get it. Like, I mean, I mean, you could tell me if I suffer from it, because there are certain clients who, you know, you relate closer to because of their personal circumstance. Like, I've got a client, he's a lawyer. 2 of his children were killed in a car accident, and the other 2 are quite badly injured. And when I speak to him, I can't help. I mean, I have 4 children, and I'm a lawyer, and you can't help but identify. And you know, it's one of the hardest phone calls I have to make in my job is when I know I'm speaking to this gentleman, because I feel his pain. You know, and he's obviously still very, very emotional about this. And every time we talk, it does take a little bit out of you every single time you interact. So is that...
You just said it.
Is that compassionate fatigue? And what are the symptoms? How do they manifest?
Yeah, so interesting you said it takes a little bit out of you every time you talk to him. You also said that you're identifying with him. And you know, chances are that it's triggering certain emotions in you, maybe some anxiety, maybe a little bit of you know, extreme sadness because you're identifying with him. We call it countertransference. Maybe you have fear, you know, of this happening to your children because if they're on the road a lot or they're away from you, or you could start to wonder, you know, is this going to happen to me? Am I going to get a phone call? So it's up to each individual to determine what they're feeling, but I'll tell you what the general symptoms are. I mean, chances are you are struggling with a little bit of it. I mean, you've been in the industry for a very long time and you're exposed to detailed accounts of what people go through. I mean, I was listening to your last podcast and I was thinking, wow, you probably went through like thousands of papers, descriptions, interviews. So you're exposed to quite a bit
the
as
fire,
a lawyer.
I'm not sure.
The fire.
Yeah,
it was
Prince Ponce, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy is such an inspiration when you meet him.
I'd love to talk about him later on because I think there were things he said in his podcast that relate to the compassion fatigue and how to deal with it.
Interesting.
But yeah, so what are the symptoms? So basically, here's the interesting thing. People don't think that you would get physical symptoms from having compassion fatigue, but the symptoms span the spectrum of emotional, psychological, like mental, and physical. So starting with emotional, just pure emotional exhaustion, maybe sadness, depressed mood, anxiety, irritability, frustration, a lack of empathy. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. So you see this all the time in emergency rooms. You go to the hospital, you've got the secretary doing the triage or the person doing the triage, and they are sometimes almost stoic. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no.
But I've gone with clients who are like gushing with blood. I mean, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, do something. You know, sometimes I'm taking care of the people, you know, I'm there with my child or a client and I'm looking after other people and the staff are stoic. It's not because they don't care. It's because they're completely fatigued and exhausted. It's a defense. It's a coping mechanism. That's how they're protecting themselves.
The empathy tank is empty.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Oh,
it's completely done.
Yeah.
Completely
no,
done.
I understand that.
Right?
Yeah.
You just get to that point. And so people like that present as being very selfish or stoic or whatever words people use.
Uncaring,
narcissistic is a big word that people love to use these days. Whatever word you're going to throw out. So then you've got the psychological part. Negative thinking. Complete self-criticism. You've got the lack of boundaries, like your brain is inability to discern from what you need to do to look after yourself and others. You may be completely lacking in boundaries and just kind of extending yourself in other ways. And then we have the physical, right? We have people who are having like heart palpitations, or I had a nurse I was working with recently who kept breaking out in a rash. She was completely exhausted, or difficulty sleeping is a big one, trouble with their appetite. So there's a variety of symptoms that can happen to someone across the spectrum. But usually they identify themselves. They can say to you, I'm overwhelmed. It's emotional overwhelm. And they'll say to you.
So the symptoms manifest similar to a brain injury then, right? Because it's emotional, it's cognitive, and it's physical.
And I didn't mention the cognitive part, but interesting that you should say that. And I'm not trying to minimize anyone who's been through a brain injury, but our executive functionings are impacted. Motivation starts to go. Like, I've seen people who just can't initiate. I had someone say to me who was previously very high functioning, I walk by my laundry, the pile is there. It's been there for weeks, but I can't touch it. That's motivation. That's initiation. That's follow through. Memory issues. We see the whole spectrum.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can totally see that. Yeah. I mean, because, whether it's...
Our brain is impacted, as you just said.
MTBI,
Exactly.
depression, anxiety,
Exactly.
PTSD, compassion fatigue. I mean, they all seem to be in that same bundle.
Well, they all stem from the brain, as you just mentioned.
Right.
I mean, our brain controls so much of our bodily functions, physiological, mental, emotional. It's unbelievable, right?
So what are we to do? I mean, you, me, everybody that works in this industry, spouses that are caring for their injured spouse and their entire world and their roles have been turned upside down. I mean, for someone like me or you, we could take a step away. You can say, I'm gonna take a month off and I need to recharge my batteries, whether it's a week, a month. Some people leave for a year. I think you left for a period of time.
Well, for babies, yeah.
Okay. Well, but
I fantasize about leaving Dale sometimes.
Yeah.
Fantasy helps too.
Yeah.
It's a form of escape.
But say that the husband is badly injured, and he was the breadwinner and out of the house, and the wife had the traditional at-home role, and now she has, instead of 2 kids to care for, she's got 2 kids plus a husband, plus without all of the emotional and financial support that he would have typically provided, or the roles could be reversed. I'm just, what does she do? Because she can't, say I'm taking 6 months off. I mean, we do see that. We see marital breakdown in our field all the time.
All the time.
But rather than going that route, are there answers?
So let me ask you a question. Does she have a lawyer? Sorry to put the pressure back on you.
Yes.
And is he or she a good lawyer?
Well, if we're representing them, they
okay,
are.
then, and I know that sounds kind of like a silly question, but I'll tell you this. One of the major contributors to compassion fatigue and burnout is lack of accessibility to the resources that you need. Okay? The reason why I ask, do they have a lawyer, is this. There's 2 different levels that I can answer your question. How do you respond? So there's all the very practical, tangible strategies. You can see them all over the internet, right? We saw it during COVID. Make sure you eat well, eat healthy foods, go for a walk.
Right.
What else? Make sure you get your sleep. Proper sleep. Sleep at the same time every day so that your melatonin can, regulate your circadian rhythm and all. The point is that when you have someone who has very real, tangible needs, and their state of distress is so intense, they're going to need somebody to respond and help them. And so what do? The first thing I always say to people, if they don't have a lawyer, is make sure you get a good lawyer, because you need someone who knows their stuff, who's going to advocate for you and get you the resources that you need.
Right.
In the event that, like you said earlier, the funding is not there, or the funding runs out, or we have an insurance company who doesn't, we scramble. And I'm going to be honest with you, Dale. I wish I could tell you that I had a magic wand, but I don't. And so what happens is the team that's working with the client absorbs the shock of that. And I have walked into homes where there's no food to put on the table, and I've walked in with groceries. I've had case managers give me a call and say, hey, can you put some money together? I want to buy a gift for the kids in this family because they have no gifts for Christmas.
I've bought Christmas presents for clients' children in the past too. So I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm talking about. And so you know what we do? We scramble. Now, here's the thing. What I do is I educate people about the things they can control. Because like anything else in life, there are things we can control and things that we can't control. So clients like that, what can they control? They can control their sleep. Sleep is pivotal to mental health. Sleep is pivotal to restoring a sense of equilibrium. So they can control their sleep. They can control, oftentimes, their support network. So I help them find, who can you reach out to? Who are the people that are there for you and that are going to support you and lift you up and inspire you and be a positive reinforcement? Because sometimes we have people in our clients' lives that don't do that, that tell them things like, when are you going back to work? Or why do you have a PSW still? Or why can't you get over this brain injury? Or why do you keep forgetting? Why do you keep forgetting to do A, B, or C? So I help them focus on the things that they can control. And then one of the areas that I love to go to, Dale, is the sort of deeper, more existential spaces, right? So here's the thing. We saw this with COVID, where there was a lot that was out of our control.
Yeah.
How many of us, even those of us that had a lot of resources, there was a time where people who had cottages couldn't even go to their cottages, right? I mean, there was a huge disparity.
Yeah, and even there's something odd about just being completely thrown out of your normal life and normal routine and your social interactions, even if, realistically, our lives carried on fine. We weren't under financial hardship. I got to spend lots of time with my adult children, but still, there's something missing, and you're just not yourself, and you feel off. And as a guy, I'm not great at reaching out, to people. My wife's much better at stuff like that. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly the point, as you're saying that it was hard for all of us, right? And let's be honest, there was a huge disparity between what some of us were able to manage and what some of us couldn't. I mean, there were people that had nowhere to go because we had 3 families living in one bedroom apartment. Right. And if one of them got sick, everyone got them. So I think more and more what we're seeing in this world is that there are so many things that are out of our control, and it just feels like life is really tough. I mean, you just have to go to the grocery store and see the cost of groceries, and every time I go, I think, wow, how does someone with a minimum wage job just afford to eat, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so what do we do when we're in a state of incredible suffering and distress, like this mother that you're describing, and we have no control about it? The only place to go is inward. Okay. And that's where the fun stuff starts.
Well, right? You're going to have to elaborate.
So, working on the sort of material realm, the tangible realm, where we're all doing and we're all running around and thinking that the solution to everything comes from outside of us, it can be somewhat dangerous because we can hit a wall, as we just said. There are many instances in life, like your past guest on your show who woke up from a hospital and discovered he had no arms, right? What do you do when you're completely helpless and things are out of your control? So the first thing that you can do is cultivate, I just want to say this is not my material. This is decades of reading, philosophy, theology, and all kinds of, But so the first thing you do is you need a shift in consciousness. You need to become aware that, first of all, that you have awareness. Because I don't know who it was that said that we're all afflicted with forgetting that I forgot the exact quote, but I mean, we forget that we have this superpower called consciousness, right? So many of us, it's been said, are going through life half conscious, right? It's almost like we're half asleep, like our eyes are wide shut. And we're kind of at the mercy of external circumstances. Part of them are, conditioned responses, ideas and thoughts we have about where we should be with our life and who we should be and what things should look like, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have all of these things in the realm of the material that, we more or less can't control. And so I think what needs to happen is we need to have a shift in consciousness and start to realize that this myth of sort of satisfaction and happiness that we've sort of all bought into, that life is just going to be all pleasure and happiness, is not necessarily the case, that life is fraught with suffering. And I've had to go through this journey with people who've been through incredible suffering. And we're not talking about the type of suffering and that comes from self-inflicted things, right? We're not talking about someone who's wasting their money away or who's arguing with everybody that they run into. We're talking about people that experience tremendous, are in a sense in a place where they're feeling very defeated, like this mother.
So they're suffering and it's not within their control.
That's right. So changing your paradigm and the way that you look at your life in terms of what your values are, what you really need, coming down to the basics, but accepting that you can still find a sense of purpose and meaning in your existence, however that might look. So the first part is shifting to a state of consciousness and becoming aware of how you feel and why you feel that way, and challenging your preconceived ideas or the conditioning that you have that tells you I need to have A, B, C, or D.
So can that person look inward on their own, or do they need to speak to somebody like you or a psychologist who can help? I mean, some people are obviously more self-aware than others.
For some people, they can do it on their own, but a lot of people need to reach out, get support from people around them, talk to, I mean, it could be family, it could be friends, but oftentimes speaking to a professional who can be an objective third party and look at things from a more a more objective perspective.
Right. So somebody knows they're upset, but they can't quite figure out why.
Yeah.
Or they know they're, whatever it is, their life is spinning out of control and they're not sure what the cause is.
Exactly. And I think just learning where to look for the support that you need is also important. There's lots of informal supports that people can reach out to that are not necessarily conventional ways where we look for support. But, if you go to a synagogue or a church and you have a pastor or a pastoral staff that you can go and see, or if you have a particular support group in the community, there's a lot of support groups where there are people who can identify, there's support groups for people who have brain injuries, people who are spouses of people who have brain injuries. The other big piece is it's been said that if you can't accept your situation, that sometimes just accepting your state of suffering, right?
Oh, I see.
Can be like a portal to deeper meaning, right? And finding, maybe this is a little too existential, but I guess what I'm saying is you can take that journey inward. That's what I'm saying. I say this because I've experienced it with a lot of clients who come out and say, I don't have these material things, but through this crisis, I've discovered quite a bit about myself.
Sure.
And I discovered who I am.
So more self-awareness. What about the idea that when something has happened to you and you're suffering and it's out of your control, if you take small bits of control back in different parts of your life, you may not be able to, Prince, for example, can't change his physical situation. But I've heard from clients, for example, and they're really struggling with cognitive or emotional or physical effects of a brain injury. And they say, it's my hour a day where I go to the gym. And if I miss that, it puts me off. And I'm in a totally different state of mind for the rest of the day. So they need their hour of working out or lifting weights. And that's because that's within their control and they can do it. And it's, purposeful and they get a lot of benefit out of it. And that's just one example. But do you believe in that as an approach to dealing with compassion fatigue?
100%. And so, when you look at compassion fatigue, there's various angles that you can take, starting with the basics, right? So starting with your sleep. Trying to get a regular sleep routine, starting to look at your nutrition, starting to look at your support network and who you can reach out to, thinking about boundaries, learning to say no. For each person, I think the important thing is to find what is important for you, find what resonates for you, find that one thing that burns you out or makes you the most stressed, and start there. Because a lot of people give up on trying to do the self-care because seems so overwhelming. Like you have to do it all at once. And I like what you just said about, picking one thing and sticking to that. And some people call that habit stacking, right?
Right.
You establish one little habit and then you go on that momentum and you're feeling good about yourself. You're feeling positive. That inner critic starts to disappear. You feel good that you're setting boundaries. So I absolutely support that. Find one thing that is meaningful to you and then start doing that. And you will start to notice that there has been a change. But I will tell you from listening, and maybe my interpretation is wrong, but from listening to Prince, I think what happened is he went from, what you would call like that, that form, looking at his form, looking at his arms, the external body, that external manifestation of who we are. And for me, the most pivotal part of the interview was when he said, I realized that I was just human. And it was interesting. He said, I got sick of being, depressed. He said it happened after about a year.
Right.
And sometimes that's what suffering does. Like suffering, and don't get me wrong, I don't wish suffering upon anyone. And I'm actually speaking from my own life experience and various experiences that I've had of suffering. It can be a gift in the sense that it can wake you up. It can be like a portal into your soul. And it seems to me like with Prince, what happened is when he got tired of suffering, he was able to look inside of him and say, hey, I'm a human being after all. And that's the superpower that we all have. We're human beings. We're not human doings, right? And so when he realized that and he grasped that, he found his power and he was liberated. And I think that's beautiful. And so I guess what I'm saying is there's a nice combination, and there needs to be a good combination between the tangible piece, things like sleep or taking an hour for yourself, and the inner work, like the breath work or the time you take to do meditation.
I was going to ask
because they
about
belong
meditation.
to two separate worlds.
Like, and I know people in general, everybody should meditate. I've never quite figured it out because I have trouble slowing my brain down. And if I'm meditating, I'm thinking about the 50 things I should be doing instead of meditating. But people swear by it.
Oh, yes.
So are you a meditator?
Oh, yes.
All
I learned how to meditate when I was 18 years old from a Swami. My first boyfriend in university is actually a Brahmachari now, which is a Hindu priest. And he's the one that introduced me to meditation. So we had a Swami that was coming from India who used to go to U of T, and we'd learn at 6 a.m. Something I read recently, and I can't remember who it is, said that we can't use the conceptual mind to find that inner being, that place of stillness. I'll explain this to you in a second.
Yeah, because I'm a little puzzled.
Yeah, it sounds kind of crazy.
Well, not crazy,
So
just, not in my normal experience.
Let me see if I hear you totally, because it took me a while when I first, so I say to my clients that meditation, when I introduce them to meditation, I say to them, I'm going to tell you about meditation. But right now, it's going to feel like you're at a menu in a restaurant. And you're just reading the ingredients. No matter how detailed I get, it's not going to matter. You are not going to experience the power until you start doing this yourself. And here's why. So I was recently reading a description of why it is the case. And I'm hoping I will do this justice. So I think the way it goes is this. You can't use you to look for your inner being, because it's your inner being that is looking for you. So let me sort of explain this to you. It's like using a flashlight to find your flashlight. You're using your flashlight to find your flashlight. It is the inner being that is looking for itself. And the only way that you can find that is by experiencing the act of stillness, being with yourself, bringing yourself to that place of awareness and consciousness. Now, here's the deal. Thinking about having your thoughts, which is an act of doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's one of the busy things that we all do. We run around, from one thing to the next, and then one day we're dead, right? That's life, right?
That is how it works. Yeah.
And so the reality is this. So having your 50 thoughts is fabulous. You sit down. There's something called the physiological breath, which regulates our nervous system, and it's super cool. What you do is you just take a nice deep breath in, and then just when you think you're done, you take another small breath. You count to 4, and then you release to 4. When you do things like that, you're resetting your autonomic nervous system. You're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. What starts to happen to you? You won't understand conceptually what meditation is. You will feel what meditation is. You will start to sit in that place of awareness and consciousness where you're aware of your 50 plus to-do list. But after a while, when you start to do it long enough, it's not going to matter, because what will happen is you will sit and you'll observe. You'll observe yourself having this frantic pace of thoughts, or your huge to-do list, or whatever you feel in your body, feeling your heartbeat or whatever. And you'll eventually start to learn how to exist in that state of being. And I think it's Eckhart Tolle talks quite a bit about this, the state of being and doing at the same time. So eventually you'll find yourself going about your day, and it's busy and it's crazy. But there's this inner silence inside of you. There's this inner stillness, and there's this inner peace. And it doesn't mean you're not going to experience emotions. You're going to. You're going to be sad. You're going to be happy. But, the reality is all of these things are fleeting. Nothing is constant but change. Like an hour ago coming here, I was nervous. Going home from this podcast, I'm going to feel great. And it's like the weather. It's always changing. Life is always changing. Many of the great philosophers, I think it was Heraclitus who said nothing is constant but change. But so, sorry for going off on a tangent, but the meditation pieces is, if I had to say one thing, one take-home point, I wouldn't even, if I had to pick, if somebody held a gun to my head and said, pick one strategy that will work for people, I would not tell you boundaries. I wouldn't even say sleep, even though sleep is beyond pivotal. I would say focus on your body, focus on the meditation piece. Shift your awareness, shift your consciousness, bring it to a place of awareness, bring it to a place of consciousness, because from there, everything starts to flow. Do your breath work, do your meditation. It's the body work I'd go with.
How long? How long are you
Honestly,
can it be 5 minutes, or does it have to be an hour?
150%. Actually, here's what I tell clients. Don't do more than 5 minutes. I don't want them doing more than 5 minutes. So I will practice in many of my sessions. I'll do 1 minute of meditation. At the beginning of the session, 1 minute at the end, depending on the client. Some of them don't want to do it. You start with 2-3 minutes, and that's it. Here's the problem. Human beings, we're so used to being human doings, right?
Right.
So the minute you tell somebody to meditate, guess what? They look at it as a task.
Of course. It's on their to-do list. Exactly.
But you know what it is? It's a beautiful place to dwell. It's literally having a visit with yourself.
Do you need a mantra that you repeat, or is there something you specifically think about?
So there's a million different ways that a person can meditate. When I first learned meditation, I was on my way to becoming a Hindu. So I would sit in the temple and I would say, Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam, and I'd say all these chants. And then I became, at the age of 21, I became a Christian. And I learned about Taizé, which is a community in France, and they sit for hours and repeat the same word. Might be something as just a simple Latin phrase, Evie, well, it could be anything. I can't remember the exact phrase. But anyway, the bottom line is you could light a candle, you could stare into it, you could do a walking meditation, you could do an eating meditation. The truth of the matter is that when you start to meditate, it becomes a place where you go, and guess what? You start to live a contemplative life, where the moment, the present, meditation, you hear a lot about living in the present moment. That's what meditation is. Meditation is being in the present moment. It's not treating the present moment, reducing it to a means to an end. You're respecting the present moment. You're in the present moment. Right now, I'm here with you. I got to not tap on the table. But right now, I'm here with you. We're having this interview, not thinking about what the end result will be, but just being in that present moment, honoring the present moment, sitting with it and giving it your everything, and enjoying it and not trying to get to the next moment. That's
great. That's great advice. And I'm actually going to try it again, because I've tried it in the past, but now I'll take a little bit more of a, strategic approach to it. I knew you were going to say no, and I'm picking the wrong word, but I'll try to take a less strategic approach to it and just try to enjoy the moment.
Look at it as a vacation or a trip. Just decide that you're going to buy a ticket. You're going to go sit in that place for 2 minutes a day. You just got a whole bunch of tickets, and each one is worth 2 minutes, and you're going to sit with yourself for 2 minutes and spend that time with yourself, and that's it.
Fantastic.
You're just going to notice what's happening.
So we've covered a lot. I don't know if we've covered everything, and I know we're running out of time. So is there 1 or 2 points that we haven't touched on that you think are really, something that you really feel you need to share with our audience? Or have we covered it?
I think the most important thing is sometimes we can be suffering from compassion fatigue and not know it, or we might know it, but we're embarrassed to talk about it or ashamed. Definitely reach out and get help, and go to the right people. Don't go to people who will criticize you or reinforce your need to keep performing and doing. Use your voice, speak up. But the most important thing is consciousness, of course. Be aware of yourself so that you know when these symptoms come.
If people want more information from you, is there a way that they can reach you?
Absolutely. You can provide my email. Would you like me to provide
go ahead.
it here?
Yeah,
it's
for
just
sure.
my name, Noha George @Rogers.com.
Perfect.
So that's NOHAGEORGE @Rogers.com. And I'd be happy to give people resources. I actually brought a list of books that people can read. And I'm probably much better one-on-one when I'm not under the bright lights and big microphones.
I thought you did great. I hope you found this not too stressful and somewhat enjoyable today, because I've really enjoyed our talk and I've learned a lot today.
Well, it's been an interesting journey, because I was telling these young ladies here that, we all live our life often as a means to an end. And as soon as you asked me to speak on the podcast, all I thought about was the end. And I had to let go of that and just be in the present moment. And that's how I relaxed. But it definitely brought up a lot of my own areas of where I need to reflect a little bit more, right? Like, we all have a very strong ego. We have an idea of who we want to be for the world and how we want to look. And it was nice to be reminded once again that I've got to die to myself and let go of that ego, and that it's not important. And I need to come back to that place of being and just retreat and let everything happen in the foreground and just be in the background, kind of, in a state of awareness.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts and opinions with us today. This is very helpful. And again, anybody who wants more information can reach out directly to Noha George at
Rogers.com.
Rogers.com. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Behind the Suit as we delve into the topic of compassion fatigue. If you or someone you know is experiencing the effects of compassion fatigue or requires legal assistance for a personal injury matter, the team at McLeish Orlando is here to help. You can reach us by visiting us at www.mcleishorlando.com or calling us at 866-685-3311.